People who have called off their wedding, what happened? I was 18 and just had a kid with my first boyfriend. Unfortunately, said boyfriend was abusive as hell, but I'd been putting up with it because I didn't know any better and didn't have family to help me out. The wedding was 2 weeks away. Invitations had gone out, I had my dress. Everything was ready to go. Then one night, he starts up with his craziness. You never know what sets it off. And I was tired, so I didn't argue back. When I didn't respond, he runs into my infant son's room, wakes him up by snatching him out of his crib, and threatens to leave with him and never come back. As I'm on my knees, crying and begging him to please give me the baby, while he's holding the screaming child above me like someone holding a piece of steak just out of a dog's reach, I started thinking twice about the whole marriage thing. I did what I had to appease him that night, and the next day when he came home from work, he had no idea where I'd moved to. He did call his mother and tell her to shoot me if she saw me, though. Luckily, she did not. In fact, she was in the process of aiding and abetting my escape at the very moment he called. Fuck that guy. My cousin called off his wedding because the night before he found out that his wife-to-be was actually a man. He's religious, so this didn't ring well with him. He hadn't had sex with her yet because he's Mormon. To be fair, that guy did have a very feminine voice and was a cross-dresser. It was a total mess, the entire thing. You know that Bridezilla show? It was pretty much like that. This bakery had a thing of not doing wedding cakes because the brides typically go insane over them, no matter how perfect they are, and demand alterations on the very day of the wedding that have nothing to do with the original description of the cake. However, my friend's fiancé was friends with the owner of the bakery, so she decided to make one for her just to be nice. Part of her gift for the wedding, a free cake. The bride went absolutely apeshit over the cake. She was screaming and yelling and in tears over this cake. This was the day before, so the friend trying to be nice decided to remake the cake from scratch and got zero sleep that night working on it. The next day, me, the bride, and the groom were in the bakery to pick up the cake, and the bride just got so angry that she picked it up and threw the cake over the counter where there were several customers, screaming her lungs out over how her friend ruined her wedding and how awful the cake was. She then turned to the groom and said, "What are we going to do about the wedding now?" To which the groom responded with, "What wedding?" Damn, I wish I had a camera. They were both black, and it was a black neighborhood, so the store pretty much turned into an episode of Jerry Springer. I called off my wedding 4 days before the big day. 2 of my bridesmaids, my cousin and my best friend since high school, got into a huge fight because they found out that the groom, my fiancé, was sleeping with both of them. It was cheating within cheating, and was easily the most surreal and heartbreakingly awful experience of my entire life. I dodged marrying a pedo. I was 17, I'd have been 18 at the time of the wedding, about to marry a 26-year-old man who had been dating me for 3 years. I was a victim about to marry her abuser. The engagement ring was to buy my consent/silence as he stuck his dick in everything that moved. He was an alcoholic, a narcissist, and a pedophile. Seriously, I wasn't a 14-year-old who looked like an 18-year-old. I was a 14-year-old who looked like a 12-year-old. I loved him because I thought he was saving me from my horrid situation with my family. My mom and I moved in with her boyfriend, only to find out too late that he was an abuser. He'd take me away from them, even if it was just for a little while. I was so messed up. I ended up living in a boarding house when things finally broke in my abusive household because, of course, I was 17 and he didn't want me to move in until I turned 18. His career depended on a squeaky clean image. I ended up pregnant and had a violent end to my pregnancy that resulted in my daughter's stillbirth. Despite this all, I loved him, but he started picking at my appearance. I was gaining too much weight, even though I was at a healthy weight for my age and height. I had gotten hips and breasts, so we talked about dieting. I only drank water when I got hungry. Everything had to be low-fat, low-calorie, and sugar-free. It worked. I went from healthy to underweight. What made me realize that I wanted out was a box of chicken wings. I ended up moving back in with my mother after she was able to escape her ex. We lived near a farmer's market that had the most amazing food vendors. I love food, and this diet was killing me. I was miserable. One day, I decided to have a cheat meal. I went and ordered a box of hot wings from the chicken place in the farmer's market. As I sat down with my favorite movie, eating my favorite food, I realized that extreme dieting would always be my life. I also realized that him wanting me to be unhealthy wasn't right. I was tired all the time, cold all the time, hungry all the time. I decided, while happily munching on that box of wings, that I was done. I called him and told him that we were through. It took me another 3 years to truly be done with him, but the wedding was over. He never got any deposits back. It took me almost a decade to realize that he wanted me to look like a 14-year-old forever. I was also always dismissive about the age difference, citing that I was mature for my age. I now realize it didn't matter. I was a child. If you enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Thank you. The wedding was called off because of genital warts. I'm not even joking. I was one of the groomsmen for my friend's wedding, and his family was super religious. I mean, like Jonestown levels of religious, so he hadn't been intimate with his bride yet. We were all waiting by the altar for the music to start, and we were silently chatting. One of the groomsmen had dated her about a year before the current groom and bride got together, and he said to another groomsman, "She's really sweet and all, but she gave me something fierce." I overheard, so I asked him to elaborate a bit. Apparently, she ended up giving him genital warts. We had maybe 3 minutes before the music starts, and we all started telling the groom as fast as we could, because he had a right to know if she hadn't told him. He had this look to him, like he didn't want to believe us, but he slowly walked down the aisle to go ask his bride if all this was true. When he got up, his parents followed him because they thought he's getting cold feet. The rest I can only describe from my place at the front of the church. For the next 45 minutes, we heard talking, shouting, then crying. Then his dad came out and told everyone that the ceremony was going to be postponed. It was a small ceremony, so we were all just scratching our heads and we left. We all then got a call 2 hours or so later that the wedding was off indefinitely. Apparently, the groom's parents didn't want him to marry someone who wasn't a virgin, let alone with an STD. We gave him some space for a few days, and after a while, he filled us in on some of the details. Most of it wasn't that important, but the part that really punched me in the gut was when he told us about how the bride had to tell him and his parents in her damn wedding gown that she got the STD from being molested as a child. The groom didn't call off the wedding. His parents did. I still think they're all dicks to this day. After a day of trying on wedding dresses with my best friend, who is my maid of honor, we met my family and husband-to-be at my brother's house for dinner. While showing my mother a picture of myself in a dress, which was on my BFF's phone, she gets a text message from my fiancé. This is odd because I can see him in the next room and I can see my friend in the kitchen. I read it, of course, and it's a huge confession from him to her, addressing how they had fooled around a few weeks ago and he was really regretting he hadn't taken things further with her. He had no idea I had my friend's phone in my hand. I simply stood up and walked 10 feet to him, held up her phone, and looked him in the eye. The look on his face was priceless. My entire family and I let them both have it verbally. We're black, so you can imagine that it was quite the showdown. Needless to say, I don't speak to either of them anymore. My best friend's wedding got called off. I was the master of ceremonies, so I was able to experience this beauty firsthand. I arrived about 2 hours before the ceremony to check the microphone, speakers, etc. As I was chatting to the DJ and generally just checking things out, I noticed every once in a while a waiter would walk by from the bar with a tray of wine, beer, and shots. I didn't think anything of it, though. As the time got closer to the ceremony, people started arriving and everyone was having snacks and drinks outside the reception venue. Both the church and reception were on a wine farm, so they were right next to each other. The bride was delayed for a long time, something I couldn't understand since she was getting ready in a guest house right there on the property. Finally, we got the go-ahead that the bride was on the way to the church. They transferred her on a golf cart, so we started getting everyone seated and ready for the show. I was standing at the entrance of the church to close the door after the bride entered, so I got to see everything transpire in all of its glory. The bride climbed off the cart, and as she was walking towards the stairs with her father, she tripped and face-planted right there on the steps of the church. As this was a wine farm, you can imagine that there was a lot of dirt everywhere, and accordingly, her dress became filthy. At this stage, I simply thought she fell over by accident, and I ran to help get her up. She just dusted herself off, said she was fine, and continued in usual fashion to enter the church. It's then that my suspicions started peaking. I noticed she was wobbling from side to side as she walked, but thought maybe she got hurt in the fall. As she started walking down the aisle, however, she was stopping to greet people, pulling faces, giving people thumbs ups, etc. It immediately hit me. She was drunk as a skunk. By the time she got to the groom, he just stood there with his jaw open. He could immediately tell what was happening. She was standing there next to him, right in front of everyone, swaying from side to side and slurring. It was painful and cringe-inducing to witness. The best part is that she insisted the wedding proceed and that everything was hunky-dory. The more the groom wanted to suspend proceedings for a bit, the more she insisted they proceed. Suddenly, she exploded at him in front of everyone, shouting and accusing him of ruining her wedding day. And then she stormed out of the church crying, and wouldn't you know it, she bumped into a bench in the aisle and went flying into the ground again. Wedding dresses are not made for running, and they are especially not made for drunken running. People helped her up and escorted her outside. The groom also left, and everyone just kind of sat there in silence. Since it was rather hot that day, we told everyone to go to the reception hall and have a drink while the situation was being dealt with. The bride had been drinking the entire day, and those shots and drinks I saw being carried from the bar were for her and her friends in the guest house. I inquired at the bar how much the bill was prior to people arriving, and was shocked to see that between her and 2 other friends, they had drunk 3 bottles of wine, 6 beers, 6 ciders, and a crap load of shots ranging from tequila to Jägermeister. At this point, the bridezilla is now crying and throwing tantrums at the guest house loud enough for everyone to hear at the reception. The groom came out to apologize and inform everyone that the wedding wouldn't be going ahead, but to please eat and drink and have fun since everything had already been paid for. I joined the groom and his family, who had flown in especially for the wedding, for a drink, and to come to grips with what just happened. Many people, especially from the bride's side, just went home. Meanwhile, bridezilla was crying and drinking away in the guest house with her bridesmaids. After about an hour or so, with many people having left, she storms out of the guest house and cry-screams at the groom for ruining her wedding again, except this time, she is even drunker. She storms off with her friends, and we eventually see them climb in a car and off they went. We finished our food and drinks and called it a night. I drove home with the groom and his folks only to discover when we got to their apartment complex where he and bridezilla were staying that she was sitting outside still in her wedding dress, makeup smeared everywhere, and drinking beer. The groom phoned her father, who then promptly came to pick her up and take her home. That is the last I ever saw of bridezilla. They tried to make things work by going for counseling, and things fizzled out, mainly because she was always drunk. They had lived together for 2 or so years prior to the wedding, and while she did drink a lot, I never noticed it. Meanwhile, my friend informed me it had actually been a bit of a problem, but he didn't think it would get that bad. Well, it did. My cousin was getting married. About 15 minutes before the wedding started, she was told that the man she was going to marry was arrested and had been on Washington's Most Wanted because of stuff he did with a 14-year-old. He was 26. He ended up in prison for whatever it was he did, and right after she told everyone, the back porch broke right under her and her friends. It wasn't much of a drop, like 6 inches, but that's when she burst out in full-blown tears. It was a very awkward day, and honestly, if I wasn't there to witness it, I wouldn't believe it either. I have some friends who had no choice but to cancel their wedding due to piss-poor planning and trying to get their cake and eat it too. They decided on an in-state destination wedding, a spot 4 hours away. They also sent save-the-dates out to guests. After already putting down a deposit and not really budgeting what they needed for a wedding, the groom was fired for watching porn at work. Because of new money issues, they decided to cut the guest list by half. People who were cut received a mass email saying they were uninvited due to financial reasons. Why they didn't personally call people is beyond me. The next day, after rejection emails went out, all the women still got a bachelorette party invite. Everyone but one person on that guest list was cut from the wedding. I never saw so many declines in a matter of an hour. The following day, everyone who was cut from the wedding got an invite to a wedding blessings party. In a nutshell, it's a consolation potluck party for not making the cut to the actual wedding. We are registered for gifts at this place. At this point, my wife was so irate. We were uninvited from the wedding. We already put a non-refundable deposit on a hotel, then invited to a blessing party, and we're expected to buy a gift. My wife made me write the groom a nasty letter telling him to stop inviting us to things after uninviting us to the wedding. I heard that I was not the only one to write a letter like this. Days later, we were told that the blessings party and bachelorette party were canceled because 90% of the guest list declined. The bride-to-be was so embarrassed and upset by the decisions made by the groom that she decided not to marry him. She canceled the wedding entirely. Moral of the story? Plan out your wedding properly and don't look at porn at work when you have an $80,000 a year salary while trying to plan a destination wedding. Over a year ago, I found out my ex, who I thought I was spending my life with, was screwing someone in my house while I was out of town. She's a psycho and has drug and alcohol problems. Every time she drank or did drugs, she'd disappear with someone new. When I ended it, she'd send me texts about the new guy she just picked up at the bar. I also found out through a mutual friend, who knew the douche who did this in my house, that he would text my ex while me and her were still together, and they would laugh and joke about the cum stains left on my couch and pillows. I didn't believe it, but one day I was pissed and said some things that were on my mind to my ex. She responded randomly with, "You should probably throw out those pillows upstairs." I'm like, "What? Why?" She said, remember that guy? Well, he told me he wiped his cum on your pillows. It's been over a year and I'm still not over this. The worst part is I did everything for her, helped her when no one else would, took her out of a toxic environment to help her overcome her demons, gave her anything and everything she ever needed. This is what I get. This experience has completely changed who I am and how I interact with women. My dad called off a wedding before he met my mother. He was with this woman who really pressured him into getting married. Basically, she just started wedding planning without a proposal, and my dad let it go too far. One night, she and her mother were discussing what food was going to be served at the reception, so they asked my dad what he thought, roasted chicken or beef, to which my dad replied, "I don't care which one you're having because I'm not going to be there." Apparently, she bought her own ring, too. My fiancé and I were together for 4 years and engaged for 3 months. A few days before the wedding rehearsal, he thought it would be a good time to tell me that he was attracted to children, in addition to adult women. Maybe he thought I'd be too distracted with the planning, maybe he couldn't hold it in any longer. I don't know. He didn't talk to me for a few days after that. Confused and messed up to my core, I told my dad, who told me to call the wedding off, which I did. He basically disappeared, making everyone think he had cold feet, and then came back 2 weeks later as though it would just be fine, if a little weird. It was not fine at all. We were high school sweethearts who ended up dating on and off for 11 years. He joined the Army after we graduated college while I stayed at home in Indiana. He served 2 years in Iraq and saw a lot of terrible things. When he came back, we got engaged. His PTSD started manifesting and became worse and worse. He started chain smoking and drinking too much, was always on edge, had nightmares and flashbacks, and would randomly start crying and yelling. He also became verbally and emotionally abusive toward me. I finally told him he had 1 month to seek help or the wedding was off. I ended up giving him 4 months. I found resources for him and encouraged him to get help. He promised he would, but he never did. One night, I was at a party and he called me. I stepped outside to talk to him and he was wasted as usual. Then he called me a fat whore and accused me of cheating. The next day, he blocked my calls, so I left him a voicemail that we were done. This happened less than 3 weeks before our wedding. The Army took a broken kid and destroyed him. I lost my childhood best friend and the love of my life, thanks to war. This is one time that religion helped me a great deal. I was engaged to a girl and we were living together. We had known each other for less than a year. She was a true nympho, and I was fine with that at 22. We went to meet the preacher who was going to marry us, and he suggested we stop having sex for 2 months before the wedding to make the night more special. So we did. We found out rather quickly we had very little in common outside the bedroom, and I wisely chose to call things off. Not too long after that, I met my soulmate, and we've been married for 19 years now. I called off my wedding because of emotional affair. We were together for 7 years and were getting married in a few months. We'd already bought a house and started tying our lives together. She was emotionally distant for some time, but I ignored it like a fool in love. Eventually, I noticed she was spending significant time chatting with a guy she met on World of Warcraft. She was also taking phone calls from a friend in private. I called her out on it, and our wedding was off the next day. We bought our house during the mortgage bubble, and now I'm stuck with an underwater mortgage on a house that's lost 50% of its value. I also still have the ring. It's been almost 5 years, and I'm still not sure what to do with it. I called off my wedding recently due to a pregnancy that my fiancé decided to terminate while I was at work. We weren't engaged as a result of the pregnancy or pressure from family and friends. We had fallen in love and moved in together after 2 years of being together. Then she took a pregnancy test due to a late period, and it was confirmed later that day by a doctor. I got excited. She got worried. Nothing I said seemed to calm her down. About a week into it, she told me she had terminated it. I harbored a lot of resentment toward her for it, though I told her I support her and her decision. Over the ensuing 6 weeks or so, I started distancing myself from her. While at home, I spent all of my time on the computer, playing video games, reading, etc. Then I finally told her that I no longer wanted to get married. She was devastated. I came home from work a couple days later, and she had taken everything that was hers and left. First of all, we were too young. We had been living together for a few years, and we were serious about each other. It just felt like it was the next step. We got engaged and planned the wedding for next summer. I had a dress and everything, but the entire time it felt off. I constantly had this feeling of, what if I'm making a huge mistake? I should have listened to it sooner, but 4 months before the big day, I finally called it off. His drinking and drug use had gotten extremely out of control. I realized I couldn't fix him, and as much as it hurt, I knew that we'd never have a happy life with his addiction issues. I moved my stuff out that next day and told him to leave me alone and never talk to me again because I needed a clean break. That fall, I started grad school and started a new life without him. Several months after we split, he contacted me telling me he'd been in AA for a couple months and needed to make amends as part of his program. I went back to our old place to meet him and saw a different man than I had ever seen. It's been almost 2 years since we split, and he's been sober that entire time. I'm happy to say we're getting married this summer, and this time, everything feels right. I have gone to at least 1 meeting a week with him, and while I know he's never cured of alcoholism, the fact that he got sober in spite of me, not because of me, increases the likelihood that he'll keep at it. For anyone considering calling off their wedding, I implore you to do so. The wedding train is a tough one to jump off of once it leaves the station, but it can be done. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe to my channel for more Reddit stories. This is Reddit Story Hour. See you in the next video.